The wind did not just blow across the desert that evening. It howled like a wounded spirit, carrying dust, hunger, and forgotten prayers with it. The sky burned in shades of dying gold, stretching endlessly over a land that had seen too many broken promises. In that lonely stretch of earth, where even hope seemed to wither, a woman knelt beside a crumbling shack, her trembling hands clutching the last piece of dry bread she owned. Her name was Alara Vance, once known in a small frontier town as a woman with laughter in her voice and light in her eyes. But time had stripped everything away from her. War had taken her husband, drought had taken her crops, and cruel men had taken what little remained of her dignity. Now, all she had left was silence, hunger, and a fading will to survive. She looked at the bread in her hands, her fingers thin and shaking, her lips cracked from days without water. Her stomach ached in a way that felt endless, like a slow fire burning from within. The desert had no mercy, and neither did life. "I have nothing left," she whispered into the wind, her voice so soft it almost disappeared before it could be heard. But the desert heard, and so did someone else. Not far from her broken home, hidden among the jagged rocks and shadows of the canyon, stood a man watching her. He had been there long enough to see her struggle, long enough to understand her pain without hearing a single word. His name was Thunderhawk, a warrior of the Apache, a man shaped by the same unforgiving land, but hardened instead of broken. His presence was quiet, almost invisible, yet powerful like the storm that followed a long silence. His dark eyes carried the weight of many battles, not just those fought with weapons, but those fought within the soul. He had lost to. His people had been pushed, betrayed, and scattered. Trust was not something he gave easily, especially not to outsiders. And yet something about her stopped him. Maybe it was the way she held on, even when everything in her world had already fallen apart. Maybe it was the way her voice carried a truth that could not be faked. Or maybe it was something deeper, something even he could not explain. He stepped forward. The sound of a boot against dry earth made Alara freeze. Fear shot through her like lightning. Slowly she turned her head, her breath catching in her throat as she saw him emerge from the shadows. Tall, strong, and silent, Thunderhawk stood like a figure carved from the very land itself. His long hair moved slightly with the wind, his face calm but unreadable. There was something dangerous about him, something that warned her to run, yet something else that made her unable to move at all. For a moment neither of them spoke. Two broken worlds stood face to face. Alara tightened her grip on the bread, instinct taking over. In a world like hers, strangers were rarely kind. Hunger made people cruel, and survival often meant taking from others. "If you came to take this," she said weakly, her voice shaking but defiant, "then do it quickly. I do not have the strength to fight you." Thunderhawk did not move. His gaze dropped to the bread in her hands, then slowly lifted to her face. He saw more than just hunger. He saw exhaustion, pain, and a quiet kind of bravery that refused to die. "I think I came to take from you," he said, his voice deep and steady, carrying a calm strength that contrasted with the chaos around them. Alara swallowed hard, her eyes filling with a mixture of fear and something else she could not name. "What else would a man like you want from a woman like me?" she asked, her words barely louder than the wind. For a brief moment something shifted in his expression, not anger, not pity, something deeper. He took another step closer, close enough for her to see the faint scars on his skin, each one telling a story of survival. "I came because you spoke like someone who has been left behind by the world," he said quietly, her breath caught. No one had ever understood her pain so simply, so clearly. Tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. She looked away quickly, ashamed of her weakness, but her voice broke anyway. "There is nothing left for me," she said. "Not my home, not my family, not even my strength. I am just waiting for the end now." The words hung heavy in the air. Thunderhawk looked at her for a long moment, as if weighing something important. The wind picked up again, swirling around them, carrying the scent of dust and distant rain that might never come. Then, without warning, he reached out. Alara flinched, her body reacting before her mind could catch up. But his touch never came. Instead, he knelt down in front of her, lowering himself to her level, an act no warrior of his kind would do lightly. "You are wrong," he said. She looked at him, confused, her tears still clinging to her lashes. "You still breathe," he continued. "Your heart still fights. It means something remains." She shook her head weakly. "Hope is a cruel thing," she whispered. "It only makes the fall harder." For the first time, Thunderhawk allowed a small hint of emotion to show. "Not all hope is cruel," he said. "Some hope is given." Before she could ask what he meant, he spoke words that would change everything. "I will be your everything." The world seemed to stop. The wind quieted. The sky darkened. Even the desert itself felt like it was holding its breath. Ilara stared at him, unable to understand what she had just heard. "Why?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Why would you say something like that to me?" Thunderhawk did not answer immediately. Because the truth was not simple. Because a promise like that carried weight, danger, and consequences neither of them fully understood. In the distance, a group of riders appeared on the horizon, their silhouettes dark against the fading light. Trouble was coming, fast and unforgiving, the kind that destroyed anything in its path. Thunderhawk's eyes shifted toward them, his expression hardening. Ilara followed his gaze, her heart dropping. "Who are they?" she asked, fear creeping back into her voice. His answer was low, but filled with warning. "Men who take more than they need." The same kind of men who had already taken everything from her once before. The same kind of men who would not hesitate to do it again. Thunderhawk stood up slowly, his presence suddenly shifting from calm to something fierce and unbreakable. And for the first time in a long while, Ilara felt something she thought was gone forever. Not safety, not peace, but the faint, fragile beginning of trust. Yet even that fragile feeling was threatened as the riders drew closer, their intentions clear in the way they moved, in the weapons they carried, and in the hunger that mirrored the worst parts of the world. Thunderhawk looked down at Ilara one last time. "You said you have nothing left," he said. Then his voice turned into a vow carved from stone. "Now you have me." But as the first gunshot echoed across the desert, breaking the silence of the dying day, one question remained unanswered. Would his promise be enough to save her? Or would the desert claim them both before morning came? Ilara's heart pounded. As the echo of the gunshot rolled through the canyon, bouncing off the jagged rocks like a warning from the past, her hands trembled, but she could feel Thunderhawk's presence behind her, steady and unyielding, a shield against the chaos that approached. The desert seemed to stretch endlessly around them, yet now it felt smaller, confined, as if the very earth were pressing them toward a reckoning. Thunderhawk did not speak. He moved with the quiet precision of someone who had lived all his life between life and death, his eyes scanning the horizon for every shadow, every movement. He had grown up in the Apache lands, where survival was a skill etched into every heartbeat. Every rock, every hill, every gust of wind carried lessons of vigilance and patience. And yet, even he had never encountered a woman like Ilara, a woman so fragile, yet so fiercely alive despite everything the world had taken from her. Ilara took a tentative step back, the dusty ground shifting beneath her feet. "Who are they?" she whispered again, voice tight with fear. Thunderhawk's dark eyes did not waver. "They are bounty hunters," he said slowly, his voice like gravel mixed with fire. "Men who track for coin, for vengeance, for nothing but blood. They will take whatever they can, and they do not care whose lives they destroy in the process." She shivered, not just from the cold bite of evening, but from the weight of his words. Her husband had been taken in a similar way, torn from her arms in the chaos of a land that had no mercy. She had buried him herself, beneath the cracked soil of her small farm, and ever since, life had been a series of empty, hungry days. She thought she had known pain, but the way Thunderhawk's words wrapped around her heart made the ache feel new, sharper, heavier. Thunderhawk crouched beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Ilara," he said, using her name for the first time in a moment that made her ears tingle. "You must listen to me. These men, they are fast. They will not hesitate. You need to be ready to run." Her lips parted, but no words came. The fear was too great, yet within it, something else stirred curiosity, a flicker of trust she had not felt in years. She wanted to ask him more about who he was, how he could promise to be her everything. And yet the sound of horses pounding across the distant desert forced her silence. Thunderhawk's mind raced, recalling every story his father had told him, every lesson the elders had shared under the night sky. He remembered the tales of Apache warriors who had protected their own with lives that were fearless and uncompromising. And now, in this strange twist of fate, he found himself the protector of a woman whose spirit was fragile yet unbroken. Protecting her was not just about fighting off the bounty hunters. It was about saving something far more precious: her hope, her will to survive, her belief that the world could still offer kindness. The riders drew nearer, the smell of sweat and dust reaching them, even before they appeared over the ridge. Thunderhawk's hand brushed the hilt of the knife at his waist, his muscles coiling like springs ready to snap. Alara's breath caught in her throat as she took in the sight: men roughened by life, faces hidden under wide-brimmed hats, eyes cold and calculating. They were the kind of men who did not negotiate, who did not pause. They lived by fear and enforced it in every step. "Why are they after me?" Alara finally asked, her voice small, trembling like the wind over the canyon cliffs. Thunderhawk's eyes softened, the fierceness of a warrior tempered by the quiet understanding of a man who had seen too much suffering. "It is not you they seek personally," he said, "but the land you stand on, the debts of men long dead. They believe there is something to take, something you cannot see yet. And in their greed, they will destroy everything in their path." Alara pressed her hand to her chest, feeling the rapid thrum of her heart. The desert had never seemed so vast, so empty, and yet so full of danger. She wanted to run, to hide, but the sudden intensity of Thunderhawk's presence anchored her. For reasons she could not name, she felt safer with him than she had with anyone in years. Vows, simple yet staggering words, echoed in her mind. Even as fear clawed at her, a spark of something else flickered, a strange warmth, a seed of hope she had almost forgotten. Perhaps it was madness, perhaps it was desperation, but she believed in that instant that he meant it. That somehow, in a world stripped of mercy, he could offer her a reason to stand and fight. The first horse emerged over the ridge, the rider scanning the land like a hawk hunting its prey. Thunderhawk stepped in front of Alara instinctively, a living wall between her and the chaos. "Stay behind me," he commanded. His voice was calm, but every muscle in his body was alive, ready to strike. He had faced hunters before, outlaws with faster guns and heavier hearts, and he had survived by reading the world in ways most could not. Now he would use every ounce of skill to protect her. The rider's eyes locked on them, suspicion and greed flashing across his face. Thunderhawk did not flinch. He met the gaze with a steady stare, and for a moment the desert seemed to hold its breath. Alara felt a shiver run down her spine. She had never seen someone so alive, so commanding, yet so utterly untamed. Every movement, every glance of Thunderhawk's carried the weight of danger and promise together, a paradox she could not unravel. The rider motioned to the others, and suddenly the group spread out, encircling them like predators closing in on their prey. Dust swirled around their boots, and the metallic glint of weapons reflected the last light of the setting sun. Thunderhawk's stance shifted, a subtle signal of readiness, and Alara understood this was no ordinary fight. This was a test of survival, of wills, of something deeper than either of them had faced in a long time. She wanted to ask him more about himself, about why he was here, about the lands he had traveled and the battles he had fought. But words felt useless in the tension of that moment. The desert itself seemed to tighten around them. Every sound amplified: the creak of leather, the thud of hooves, the whisper of wind through dry sagebrush. Thunderhawk whispered again, almost to himself, but loud enough for her to hear. "Whatever comes, you must hold on to this. Your life, your spirit. I will not let them take it. Not from you, not ever." Alara's breath caught in her throat, her eyes filling with tears she refused to wipe away. There was something terrifyingly real about his words, a promise that carried both weight and danger. And as the shadows of the riders crept closer, she realized that her life had already changed in the briefest of moments by the presence of a man who had stepped into her world and vowed to be her everything. Thunderhawk's hand brushed hers for a fraction of a second, a fleeting connection in a moment where survival was everything. The contact sent a shiver through her, both comforting and alarming. The desert, the bounty hunters, the hunger and despair, they all faded, if only slightly, in the presence of something that felt unbreakable. Yet, even as the sun sank completely behind the horizon. Leaving the canyon in twilight and shadow, one truth remained: danger was still closing in. And the promise of safety was far from guaranteed. The desert had never been kind, and tonight it would demand everything they had, testing their courage, their trust, and perhaps even their hearts. Elara looked up at Thunderhawk, her voice barely a whisper. "If we survive this, will you still stay?" His eyes met hers, steady and unwavering. "If we survive," he said, "I will be with you every step, no matter what comes next." But as the riders closed the circle and the first voices called out, hoarse and threatening, neither of them could know if the desert would allow that promise to be kept, or if it would tear them apart before dawn. The wind picked up again, carrying the distant sound of gunfire. And in that moment, the night itself seemed to lean in, hungry for the story that was about to unfold. The night had swallowed the desert whole, leaving only the cold hiss of wind and the distant stomp of hooves that threatened to close in on them. Elara crouched behind a jagged boulder, her fingers digging into the rough stone, trying to steady herself as the shadows of the bounty hunters danced across the canyon walls. Every heartbeat thundered in her chest like a drum of warning, each echo a reminder of how fragile her world had become. Thunderhawk's presence was constant, a silent pillar beside her. He had moved with the same patient grace he had shown since their first meeting, his senses stretching far beyond the immediate dangers, anticipating every move before it happened. But he could not stop the tension in her shoulders, the trembling of her hands, the panic that threatened to choke her. Survival had a cost, and tonight that cost felt unbearable. "They're spreading out," Thunderhawk murmured, barely audible over the wind. His eyes scanned the terrain, taking in every shadow, every outline of the horses against the moonlit desert. "They want to cut off any escape. They're calculating, patient, cruel." Elara swallowed, trying to find the courage she had thought long dead. "Why? Why me?" she whispered, voice trembling. "I'm just a widow. I have nothing left. Why would they hunt me?" Thunderhawk's gaze softened, though the fire of alertness never left his eyes. "It's never just about what you have," he said. "It's about what you represent. You're a piece of land, a piece of history, and to them that is worth blood. And sometimes, life like yours is more dangerous than the strongest gun." The words chilled her. She had lived through loss, but the idea that her very existence could be a target felt unbearable. Yet even in her fear, she could not help the curiosity that had taken root, the question of what exactly Thunderhawk saw in her that made him risk so much. As if sensing her thoughts, Thunderhawk reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Elara," he said softly, "you are stronger than you know, stronger than this land that has tried to bury you, and I will not let them break you while I breathe." Her heart skipped, caught between terror and a fragile warmth that threatened to bloom despite the danger. She had forgotten what it felt like to be protected, to have someone care so fiercely without asking for anything in return. And yet, the danger pressing closer reminded her that life in this land demanded more than hope. It demanded action, cunning, and a willingness to face the worst. From the ridge above, a rider's shadow shifted. Thunderhawk's body tensed, coiled like a spring. In an instant, he had moved, placing himself in a position that blocked the line of sight to Elara. His voice was low but commanding. "Do not move. Do not make a sound." The rider stopped, scanning the terrain, as if aware something was off, but unable to pinpoint it. Thunderhawk's sharp eyes traced every movement, every flicker of the rider's posture, anticipating his next action. Elara held her breath, barely daring to blink. She felt like a prey animal trapped in the predator's gaze, and yet strangely protected in the presence of the man beside her. But the desert had other plans. A sudden cry echoed from a nearby canyon, unfamiliar and chilling. It was not human, not the sound of a horse, but a scream that carried menace and warning alike. Thunderhawk's eyes narrowed. "They're not alone," he muttered. "There are others in these lands. Things that do not forgive, things that wait for the unwary." Elara's stomach turned. She had heard the stories of desert spirits, of ghost riders, of bandits who vanished and returned with deadly intent. But nothing had prepared her for the combination of human cruelty and the unforgiving wilderness. She wanted to retreat, to hide under blankets and forget that the world existed. Yet the presence of Thunderhawk made retreat impossible. She could not leave him. Suddenly, a gunshot cracked through the night, sharp and startling. Ilara's heart leaped. Thunderhawk moved instantly, grabbing her arm and dragging her behind a larger rock. "Stay low," he barked. His hands were steady, his movements precise, his focus unshakable. The bullet struck close enough to send a shiver through the earth. From the shadows, the bounty hunters had begun their approach, spreading wider, closing the trap. Thunderhawk's eyes flicked to the canyon entrance where moonlight met dust, calculating escape routes, cover points, angles that might offer them even the slightest advantage. He was a master of the land, a man molded by survival and instinct, but even he recognized the danger of being surrounded. Ilara pressed herself closer to him, shivering not from cold, but from the intensity of the moment. Her mind raced with memories her husband's laughter, the small farmhouse now abandoned, the fields parched and cracked under the relentless sun. All of it felt fragile, fleeting, as if one wrong move would erase every piece of her past. Thunderhawk whispered again, his voice cutting through the night. "Listen to me. You need to move with me, step by step. Trust me. Every decision from this point forward could mean life or death." She nodded, though fear threatened to paralyze her. The desert wind picked up, whipping sand into her eyes, but Thunderhawk's hand found hers, gripping tight, grounding her. She felt the pulse of his strength, the unspoken promise in every motion. And despite the terror, her heart began to beat with a strange mix of adrenaline and something else, something she had not felt in years. In the distance, one of the hunters had split from the group. Moving cautiously along a ridge that overlooked their position, Thunderhawk's eyes followed him. "He's trying to flank us," he said quietly. "If he succeeds, we'll have no escape." Ilara's chest tightened. "Then what do we do?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Thunderhawk's jaw tightened, eyes scanning the desert as he weighed the options. "We use the canyon," he said finally. "There's a narrow passage behind the rocks. They won't follow unless they are fools, and we'll have a chance to turn the tables." The plan required silence, timing, and a courage that Ilara was unsure she possessed. But as she looked at him, his expression resolute and unwavering, she found herself drawing on a strength she had thought long dead. He was not just a protector, he was a force that demanded she rise, that reminded her that even in the midst of despair, survival was possible. As they prepared to move, the wind carried another sound, soft, almost whispering, but unmistakable. Someone, or something, had been following them for longer than they realized. Thunderhawk's eyes narrowed. "We are not alone," he said, voice low and warning, "and not all who follow us come with ill intent. But none can be trusted yet." Ilara's heart raced. Every step forward felt like a gamble, every shadow a potential threat. The desert, the hunters, and whatever other presence lingered around them combined into a tension that pressed on her chest. Yet through it all, she could not ignore the pull between them, the strange, unspoken connection, the shared survival, and the vow that he had made to her. They moved together, silent as shadows, every motion calculated. Ilara's hands brushed against the rough stone walls of the canyon, and she realized with a mix of awe and terror that she had never felt this alive. Every sense was heightened, the smell of dust, the sound of hooves, the feel of Thunderhawk's steady presence beside her. And somewhere deep inside, a spark of something older and more dangerous began to grow, a spark that was as much fear as it was desire, as much trust as it was risk. She had nothing left. He had vowed to be her everything, and together. In the heart of a desert that demanded strength, they would have to survive the night. But survival was only the beginning. The canyon walls stretched endlessly ahead, dark and foreboding, hiding threats that neither of them could yet see. And as the hunters drew closer, and the wind carried whispers of things waiting in the shadows, Ilara understood one undeniable truth. The desert had not yet revealed its final test, and neither had the hearts of the two people who were now bound together by fate. Fear and a promise that could cost them everything. The canyon narrowed to a tight passage, the jagged walls pressing in on either side, and the moonlight barely pierced the darkness. Ilara's breath came in sharp, uneven gasps as she followed Thunderhawk, each step a careful dance over loose stones and sand that threatened to betray them with a slip or a scream. The hunters' voices were still audible behind them, rough and taunting, but the walls provided cover a temporary reprieve in a night that seemed determined to strip everything away. Thunderhawk moved like a shadow himself, every movement precise, instinct guiding him through the darkness. His eyes never left the passages ahead, reading the subtle shifts of wind, listening to the faintest echoes that might reveal an approaching threat. Elara tried to match his pace, gripping the edge of the canyon walls to keep herself upright. Fear burned in her chest, yet underneath it a different fire flickered, a dangerous, exhilarating mixture of trust, dependence, and a heart stirring after years of cold silence. "They're closer than I thought," Thunderhawk muttered, barely moving his lips. His voice carried a sharp edge of warning, but it was softened by the quiet care he took to keep her behind him. "We have to be ready. One mistake, one sound, and it could be over before we even know it." Elara nodded, though the truth was that her mind was racing with questions. Questions about him, about why he had come for her, why he had risked everything to step into her broken world. The desert had taught her suspicion. Trust was a luxury she could barely afford. And yet the strength she felt in his presence was undeniable. He had promised to be her everything, and somehow, even now, she believed him. A sudden rustle above them made her jump. Thunderhawk's hand shot out, gripping her shoulder, steadying her. His dark eyes flicked upward, sharp and calculating. "Stay close," he hissed. "They're not the only ones out here tonight." Elara swallowed hard, her throat tight with fear and anticipation. She'd heard stories of desert outlaws and wandering spirits, men who vanished only to strike when least expected. But she had never imagined herself trapped in such a moment, so alive and so aware of every heartbeat, every whisper of wind, every shadow that might conceal danger. From a higher ridge, a single rider emerged, separate from the group. His horse moved cautiously, and the faint glint of a gun reflected the faint moonlight. Thunderhawk's gaze locked on him instantly, every muscle coiled. "He's scouting," he whispered. "We can't let him warn the others. If he moves faster, we're surrounded." Elara's stomach twisted. "Then what do we do?" Thunderhawk's hand brushed hers for a fleeting second, grounding her, giving her courage she did not know she had left. "We make them think we are one step ahead," he said, voice steady. "Turn their own fear against them." He moved first, silent as a shadow, slipping behind a rocky outcrop. Elara followed, her pulse thrumming so hard she feared it would give them away. The scout's horse paused, sensing something, but Thunderhawk had already disappeared from the open line of sight. Seconds stretched into what felt like an eternity, every rustle and whisper magnified in the silence. Then, with a careful motion, Thunderhawk launched a small rock, hitting another boulder down the canyon. The sound echoed like a gunshot, and the scout spun his horse around, moving to investigate. Elara's chest tightened with fear and awe. He had controlled the chaos with a single, effortless motion, and she had been swept along by it, alive and terrified all at once. You knew exactly what to do," she whispered. Thunderhawk glanced at her, a fleeting smile touching the corners of his mouth, though his eyes remained dark and intense. "It's not just instinct. It's knowing the land, knowing people, knowing danger, and knowing that you will not survive if I hesitate." Her stomach fluttered, a mix of fear, admiration, and something unnameable. She had lived her life in shadows, but here, with him, the world seemed sharper, more dangerous, and yet thrilling in a way she had not felt since before tragedy had stripped everything away. But there was no time for thoughts of awe. The scouts' movements had given away the positions of the other riders, and now the main group had begun to fan out, closing in from multiple angles. Thunderhawk pressed himself against the canyon wall, signaling for her to do the same. "We have to move fast," he said.
Ow.
"Once they realize the passage is narrow, they will try to block us. That's when we strike." Elara's hands gripped his arm instinctively, seeking both stability and comfort. I trust you," she whispered, though even as the words left her lips, fear gripped her again. "But what if we can't get out?" Thunderhawk's gaze softened for just a moment, but the moment passed as he scanned the ridge above. "Then we make them regret ever coming here," he said, his voice low, a promise edged with danger. "We fight smart. We fight together." The bounty hunters were now within shouting distance, their voices harsh and taunting. One of them swung his rifle, scanning the canyon with a cruel smile, unaware of the trap that was closing around them. Thunderhawk's hand tightened on hers. Stay close. Do not make a sound. Trust me. Elira's chest tightened as adrenaline surged. Her pulse pounded, yet beneath the fear something else grew, a determination she had thought lost forever. She would not let herself be taken, not again. And if she survived this night, if they survived, she knew that nothing would feel impossible after what they endured together. Thunderhawk moved first, sliding behind a boulder and drawing a small curved knife from his belt. His eyes flicked toward the hunters, calculating, measuring, ready to strike at the precise moment. Alara crouched behind him, the warmth of his body brushing hers, the subtle strength in his hand a tether to reality in a night that felt like a living trap. One of the hunters stepped forward, whistle sharp in the night air. The sound made Alara flinch, but Thunderhawk's presence kept her grounded. He pressed a finger to his lips and nodded toward a narrow fissure in the canyon wall. Through here, quickly. The passage was barely wide enough for a single person, but it offered cover. They slipped inside, pressed against the rough stone, silent as shadows. The hunters paused, scanning the canyon for movement, unaware that their prey had already begun to vanish into the labyrinth of rocks. Ilara's heart raced with every step, every sound magnified. She felt the sweat on her brow, the ache in her muscles, the fire of fear burning through her veins. And yet, in the midst of it, there was a strange exhilaration, a sense of being alive in a way she had not felt since before her world fell apart. Thunderhawk moved like a predator, leading her through twists and turns, never faltering, always alert. She followed, trusting him implicitly, and for the first time in years, she felt a sense of safety in someone's presence, fragile, tenuous, but undeniable. Then, a sudden sound, a snap of a branch, faint but unmistakable, made both of them freeze. The hunters were closer than they realized, moving cautiously, but they were not alone either. Thunderhawk's eyes darkened. "There's more than just them," he muttered. "And we may not have seen the worst yet." Alara swallowed, the grip of fear tightening around her. The canyon seemed to close in, every shadow a potential threat, every whisper of wind carrying menace. And yet she felt the pulse of Thunderhawk's hand on hers, the quiet promise in his eyes, and a spark of hope that she had not dared to feel for years. The night stretched endlessly ahead, full of danger and uncertainty, but for the first time, Lotta believed that survival and perhaps even something more was possible. Yet even as she clung to that fragile hope, the shadows of the hunters pressed closer, and the desert itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see who would emerge victorious, and who would fall. The first rays of dawn began to pierce the horizon, spilling gold and amber across the jagged desert. Lara pressed herself against the canyon wall, her body trembling from exhaustion and adrenaline. Thunderhawk crouched beside her, eyes scanning the ridge one last time before he allowed himself a brief moment of relief. The hunters were gone, disoriented, their trap undone by the narrow canyon, and their own underestimation of the land and its protector. Alara let out a shaky breath, feeling the tension in her body slowly ease. She turned to him, seeing the dirt and dust on his skin, the faint scars that told stories of battles fought and survived. Yet his gaze was softer now, and the raw intensity that had kept her alive all night was replaced with something warm, almost gentle. "We made it," she whispered, disbelief and relief mingling in her voice. Thunderhawk's lips curved into a faint smile. "For now," he said, though the edge of caution never completely left him. He had survived countless dangers, but the relief in this moment was shared, human, real. He glanced at her, noting the lines of fear softened by awe and the first flickers of something deeper. "And you?" he asked quietly. "Are you all right?" Alara nodded, but her voice caught. I am. Thanks to you," her hands found his, gripping him tightly. It was not just gratitude, but something more profound, a connection forged in danger, strengthened by trust and tempered by shared survival. The canyon opened to a small plateau, a hidden clearing bathed in soft sunlight. Thunderhawk led her forward, and for the first time since the night began, Alara could look at the desert without feeling only fear. She saw the beauty of it, the way light touched the rocks, the distant hills that seemed to promise freedom, the wind that whispered possibilities. She felt alive again, not as a woman left behind by loss, but as someone who had survived, and someone who could hope. They paused at the edge of a small stream, the cool water a blessing after the harsh night. Alara knelt, letting the water run over her hands, drinking carefully, feeling strength slowly return to her body. Thunderhawk watched her, his presence steady and protective, and in that moment, words were unnecessary. The silence between them was full of meaning, full of unspoken promises, of battles fought and victories earned. Finally, Ilara looked up, her eyes meeting his. "I thought I had nothing left," she said softly. "But you reminded me that even in the worst of times, someone can change everything." Thunderhawk knelt beside her, taking her hands in his own. "You have more than you know," he said. "More courage, more strength, and now more hope." His voice was low, steady, and tender, carrying a weight that had been forged in hardship but softened by care. "I vowed to be your everything, and I meant it. Nothing in this world will make me break that vow." Tears filled her eyes, not from sorrow, but from the overwhelming sense of safety, of love, and of renewal. The night had tested them both, had pressed them to the edge of fear and survival. But in the quiet aftermath, they realized that what they had built together was unshakable. The desert had been cruel, life had been cruel. They had endured and enduring. They had discovered something far greater than survival. Ilara leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder, and felt the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, a grounding force after the chaos. "I never thought I'd feel alive like this again," she whispered. "Not after everything I've lost." Thunderhawk's hand stroked her hair gently. "Life will always take from us," he said, "but it also gives, and sometimes it gives us someone worth fighting for. Someone worth protecting, someone worth loving." For a long moment, they stayed in silence, letting the sunrise wash over them, feeling the desert breathe around them. The danger was past, at least for now, but the lessons of the night lingered. Lara knew that fear would return someday, that life would test her again, but she also knew that with Thunderhawk by her side, she would not face it alone. They began walking toward a distant ridge, the path ahead uncertain, but promising. Every step was a declaration, a reclaiming of life, of trust, and of love. Ilara could feel the warmth of his hand on hers, the steady presence that had saved her. And she understood that the wilderness around them, harsh, unforgiving, yet breathtakingly beautiful, mirrored their own journey. Survival had brought them together, danger had forged them stronger, and now hope could take root. Thunderhawk glanced at her, a faint, reassuring smile on his lips. "The desert may always test us," he said, "but it will not break us. Fought together, we are stronger than it, stronger than any man who thinks he can take what is ours." Ilara returned his smile, the first genuine, unguarded expression in years. "Together," she agreed. The word felt sacred, binding them, sealing a promise beyond mere survival, a promise of love, of trust, and of life rebuilt from the ashes of loss. As the sun rose higher, they reached a small plateau that overlooked the vast open desert. And from this height, the endless horizon stretched before them, filled with possibilities and freedom. They stood side by side, feeling the wind whip around them, the warmth of sunlight on their faces, and the knowledge that they had overcome the darkest night together. Ilara tilted her head, looking at Thunderhawk with eyes full of wonder and gratitude. "I thought I would never see a day like this," she said softly. "I thought the world had nothing left for me, but now it feels like everything is possible." Thunderhawk's gaze softened, his hand brushing her cheek. "And it is," he said. "For us, everything is possible. We have faced fear, we have faced loss, and we have survived. Now all that remains is to live, to love, and to be together." A gentle smile spread across her face, her heart lightened by the truth of his words. The desert had been cruel, life had been harsh, but they had endured, and in enduring, they had discovered a love stronger than fear, stronger than any obstacle the world could place in their path. They began walking down the plateau together, hand in hand, their shadows stretching long across the desert floor. Every step was a victory, every breath a celebration of survival and hope. The canyon, the hunters, the endless trials, they were behind them now. The future was uncertain, yes, but it was theirs to shape together. Ilara rested her head against Thunderhawk's shoulder as they walked, feeling a sense of peace she had not known in years. "I have nothing left," she said quietly, echoing the words that had once carried despair. Thunderhawk squeezed her hand gently, a reassuring warmth in his touch. "You have me," he said firmly. voice full of certainty. And that is everything. The desert stretched endlessly around them, a land that had tested them, threatened them, and shaped them, but it could not take from them what they had discovered together: trust, courage, and a love that had survived even the harshest night. And in that moment, with the sunrise bathing the world in golden light, Ilara knew the truth she had longed for. She was no longer alone. And life, despite its trials, had given her a second chance at everything she had once thought lost. With Thunderhawk by her side, she felt ready to face whatever came next, to embrace the world with open heart, and to live a life that, at last, was full of love, hope, and the promise of tomorrow. They walked forward together, the desert behind them, the sun ahead. And for the first time in a long time, the world felt alive, beautiful, theirs to conquer. Tell us in the comments how you liked the story and where you are watching from. If the story touched your heart, subscribe to our channel to stay with us for more exciting stories.